Ladies and gentlemen, life is a complex journey, and one of its greatest challenges is the people we choose to accompany us along the way. Some lift us up, challenge us, and help us become the best version of ourselves. Others, however, pull us down, drain our energy, or distort our sense of reality. A wise person, through careful reflection, learns that it is not just acceptable but necessary to distance oneself from certain individuals. It is not an act of malice, it is an act of survival and growth. Personal responsibility and boundaries are two pillars upon which a fulfilling and balanced life is built. Without them, life becomes a chaotic blur of unmet expectations, strained relationships, and emotional exhaustion. Establishing boundaries and taking responsibility for one's actions is not merely a matter of practicality, it is a profound psychological necessity that safeguards one's well-being and fosters personal growth. In the realm of relationships, these concepts are particularly significant because the connections we maintain shape our experiences and ultimately our identity. To begin, personal responsibility entails recognizing that each individual is the primary architect of their life. While circumstances and external factors play a role, it is our reactions, choices, and decisions that dictate the trajectory of our existence. Accepting responsibility is a cornerstone of psychological maturity, as it allows us to take control of our emotions and behaviors rather than casting blame on others or external conditions. For instance, when faced with a toxic relationship, it may be tempting to dwell on the faults of the other person, lamenting their shortcomings or lack of empathy. However, true growth begins when we turn the mirror inward and ask ourselves critical questions. Why am I tolerating this? What can I do to change the situation? How can I make better choices in the future? These questions are not easy to answer because they demand introspection and accountability. Taking responsibility for one's role in maintaining unhealthy relationships is a humbling process, but it is also liberating. It shifts the focus away from futile attempts to control others and redirects it towards something within our power, our own decisions. This act of reclaiming agency not only empowers us but also allows us to set the stage for healthier, more rewarding relationships in the future. However, accepting responsibility is only one side of the coin. The other is the ability to establish and enforce boundaries, which serve as the invisible lines that define what we are willing to accept in our interactions with others. Boundaries are not walls meant to isolate us, but rather guidelines that protect our emotional, mental, and even physical well-being. They help us communicate our needs, respect ourselves, and ensure that others treat us with the dignity we deserve. Unfortunately, many people struggle with setting boundaries due to fears of rejection, conflict, or being perceived as selfish. This reluctance often stems from childhood experiences or societal conditioning that teaches us to prioritize harmony and others' needs over our own. For example, an individual raised in a household where their feelings were consistently dismissed may grow up believing that their needs are less important than those of others. Consequently, they may allow others to overstep their boundaries, even to the point of enduring emotional harm, because they lack the confidence to assert themselves. The irony is that failing to set boundaries often leads to the very outcomes people fear: resentment, conflict, and damaged relationships. When we allow others to disregard our limits, we gradually accumulate frustration and resentment, which may eventually erupt in outbursts or lead to the silent withdrawal from the relationship. This is why setting boundaries is not only an act of self-care, but also an act of care for others. By clearly communicating what we need and expect, we give others the opportunity to understand and respect our perspective. For example, consider a friendship where one person frequently cancels plans at the last minute. While this behavior may seem minor at first, over time it can erode trust and create feelings of being undervalued. If the person on the receiving end of this behavior never addresses it, they may begin to distance themselves from the friendship or harbor resentment toward the other person. Conversely, by setting a boundary, such as expressing that their time is valuable and cancellations should be communicated in advance, they not only protect their own well-being, but also give the other person a chance to adjust their behavior. Setting boundaries, however, is only half the battle. The real challenge lies in enforcing them, especially in the face of resistance or pushback. It is not uncommon for people to test boundaries, either consciously or unconsciously, particularly if they have benefited from a lack of limits in the past. In these moments, it is essential to remain firm and consistent, even if it feels uncomfortable. Each time we uphold a boundary, we reinforce its importance and demonstrate our commitment to self-respect. Importantly, boundaries are not static, they are fluid and should adapt to different contexts and relationships. The boundaries we set with close family members, for instance, may differ from those we establish with colleagues or acquaintances. Furthermore, as we grow and evolve, our boundaries may need to be reassessed and adjusted to reflect our changing priorities and values. This dynamic nature of boundaries underscores the importance of self-awareness and regular reflection. One of the most profound benefits of personal responsibility and boundaries is the clarity they bring to our relationships. When we take responsibility for our actions and set clear boundaries, we establish a framework for mutual respect and understanding. This clarity not only strengthens healthy relationships, but also makes it easier to identify and distance ourselves from those who consistently violate our boundaries or refuse to take responsibility for their own actions. For instance, a person who repeatedly lies, manipulates, or dismisses your feelings is unlikely to respect your boundaries, no matter how clearly they are articulated. Recognizing this pattern and taking responsibility for your role in tolerating it can be the catalyst for cutting ties and prioritizing your own well-being. This process is not easy, as it often involves difficult decisions and uncomfortable emotions. However, it is a necessary step toward creating a life that aligns with your values and aspirations. Ultimately, personal responsibility and boundaries are not about perfection or rigidity. They are about cultivating a sense of balance and harmony in our lives by taking ownership of our choices and protecting the space we need to grow and thrive. This process is deeply personal and requires ongoing effort, but the rewards authentic relationships, emotional resilience, and a sense of empowerment are immeasurable. There are certain individuals whose mere presence in our lives leaves us feeling depleted, emotionally exhausted, and mentally drained. These are the energy vampires, individuals who, whether consciously or unconsciously, siphon our energy, leaving us with little for ourselves. It is important to understand that these energy drains are not simply a matter of external interactions. They are deeply embedded in the dynamics of relationships and can have significant psychological consequences over time. Whether it's a friend, a family member, or a colleague, the effect of these relationships can be corrosive, and recognizing them is the first step toward taking back control of our own emotional and mental energy. Energy vampires, by definition, are those individuals who consistently demand emotional or mental support without ever providing anything in return. They may be dramatic, excessively needy, or manipulative, or simply incapable of offering the same emotional investment that they demand. Over time, these interactions leave us feeling exhausted, resentful, and confused about the balance of give and take in the relationship. It's crucial to recognize that relationships of all kinds are supposed to be a dynamic exchange of support, understanding, and empathy. When one party constantly takes without giving, the other can find themselves drained, emotionally flat, and unable to maintain the levels of connection or energy that are necessary for personal growth or even daily functioning. The problem with energy vampires is not necessarily that they are bad people. Many are not malicious or intentionally harmful. Often their behavior is born out of personal issues such as insecurity, emotional trauma, or a lack of awareness. However, the result of their actions is the same. They leave others feeling hollow, disconnected, and tired. In these relationships, there is a significant imbalance of emotional energy, and the consequences can be severe if left unchecked. One type of energy vampire is the dramatist. These individuals seem to live for chaos and constant emotional turmoil. They are often in a perpetual state of crisis, whether real or imagined, and demand constant attention and support from those around them. For example, they might tell elaborate stories of how they are wronged by others or dramatize trivial events, making them appear as monumental obstacles in their lives. The dramatist thrives on being the center of attention and often expects others to drop everything to address their emotional needs. While it may seem compassionate to listen to someone going through a rough time, the dramatist's crisis is often never-ending. They rarely seek solutions to their problems. Instead, they continually feed off the sympathy and energy of those around them. A dramatist may turn every conversation into an emotional demand, leaving little room for others to express their own concerns or experiences. The result is a relationship that feels one-sided, where the other person is left feeling like their own emotional needs are neglected. Another particularly draining type of energy vampire is the narcissist. Narcissistic individuals often exhibit a profound need for admiration, validation, and attention from others. They crave constant reinforcement of their self-worth and are typically incapable of offering genuine empathy or concern for the emotional well-being of others. They often expect others to constantly praise them, stroke their ego, and provide them with the admiration they desperately seek. The narcissist world revolves around themselves, and they are often oblivious to the emotional toll they exact on others. They may disregard others' boundaries, interrupt conversations, and show little interest in anyone's life except their own. The constant need for affirmation and admiration from those around them can leave others feeling used, unimportant, and emotionally drained. The narcissist's inability to connect on a deeper, empathetic level means that interactions with them often feel shallow and exhausting. Closely related to both the dramatist and the narcissist is the constant victim, the person who continually positions themselves as the victim in every situation, no matter the circumstances. They have an uncanny ability to turn even the most mundane experience into a story of suffering and misfortune. Whether it's a disagreement with a colleague or a mild inconvenience, they will often frame it as yet another instance of being unfairly treated or wronged by others. The constant victim is frequently engaged in a narrative of personal injustice, always feeling like life is happening to them rather than for them. The issue with the constant victim is that their energy demands are insatiable. They expect others to validate their feelings of helplessness and constantly provide emotional support. However, instead of taking responsibility for their own reactions, they will shift blame onto others or external factors. This type of person may engage in manipulative behavior to keep others invested in their victimhood, eliciting sympathy or pity in order to sustain their narrative. Over time, this becomes exhausting for those around them, especially as the victim rarely seeks to change their circumstances or take proactive steps toward healing. A subtler, yet equally draining form of energy vampire is the emotional manipulator. This person often uses tactics like guilt, passive aggressiveness, or triangulation to get their way or elicit a specific response from others. Emotional manipulators are skilled at making others feel responsible for their feelings, and they often place the burden of their emotional state onto others, expecting them to correct or soothe their emotional distress. For example, an emotional manipulator might say something like, "If you really cared about me, you would know what's wrong," or "I can't believe you're doing this to me when you know how much I've been through." By framing the situation in such a way, they aim to create a sense of obligation or guilt in the other person, making them feel as though they must act to relieve the manipulator's emotional turmoil. This form of manipulation is subtle but incredibly draining, as it forces the person being manipulated to constantly second-guess themselves and adjust their behavior to maintain the peace. Lastly, the perpetual complainer is an individual who constantly focuses on what is wrong in their life, no matter how small or insignificant. They rarely express gratitude or acknowledge the positives in their environment, instead fixating on what they perceive to be unfair, unjust, or unsatisfactory. Conversations with a perpetual complainer are usually filled with negative commentary, often about the things or people they believe are holding them back or causing their suffering. While everyone has grievances at times, the perpetual complainer cannot seem to stop their endless stream of negativity. Even when offered solutions or ways to improve their situation, they will dismiss these efforts and instead continue to dwell in their complaints. This constant flow of negativity is emotionally draining because it requires others to constantly try to uplift or change their perspective, which over time becomes a losing battle. The unfortunate consequence of tolerating energy vampires in our lives is that their presence can slowly erode our sense of self. We begin to feel responsible for others' emotions, become consumed by their problems, and lose the ability to focus on our own needs and goals. The impact is cumulative, and over time, our physical health, mental clarity, and emotional resilience are worn down. We can even begin to question our worth, as energy vampires tend to make us feel inadequate for not being able to meet their never-ending needs. Recognizing energy vampires is the first step toward reclaiming your emotional well-being. Once identified, we can begin to take the necessary actions to limit or eliminate these relationships, not out of malice, but out of self-preservation. Criticism is a natural part of life, especially in a world where feedback is essential for personal and professional growth. It can help us improve, challenge our assumptions, and refine our approaches to various tasks. However, not all criticism is constructive. In fact, there is a certain type of critic whose words are less about helping us grow and more about diminishing our sense of self-worth. These are the eternal critics, individuals whose constant undermining creates barriers to our growth and personal development. Whether they appear in our personal lives or professional circles, the effects of these critics can be profound, limiting our potential and leaving us questioning our abilities. The eternal critic is someone who seems to find fault in everything we do, no matter how well-intentioned or well-executed our actions may be. Their feedback rarely focuses on solutions or improvements, but instead dwells on perceived shortcomings, often in a way that stifles creativity, motivation, and self-confidence. Over time, this can lead to a pattern of self-doubt where we second-guess our decisions and feel as though we are constantly falling short. The insidious nature of the eternal critic lies in their ability to make us feel inadequate, even when we are making genuine efforts toward progress. One of the most common tactics employed by the eternal critic is dismissiveness. Rather than offering helpful suggestions or recognizing the value in our efforts, they tend to minimize our achievements or brush them aside as unimportant. This behavior can be particularly damaging because it makes us question our own judgment and the worth of our work. For example, a person who is consistently dismissed might share an accomplishment only to have the critic respond with indifference or sarcasm, saying things like, "That's nice, but it's nothing special," or "You could have done better." This kind of dismissal isn't just about the immediate discouragement, it also feeds into the long-term belief that no matter how hard we try, it will never be enough. Over time, this creates a pattern of self-sabotage as we start to lower our expectations for ourselves and stop setting ambitious goals. When others fail to validate our efforts, we begin to internalize their criticism and view our achievements as insignificant. The power of dismissive criticism is that it erodes our belief in our own potential, making it harder to see the value in our contributions. Another form of the eternal critic is the perfectionist, who sets impossibly high standards and expects flawless execution at all times. The perfectionist rarely appreciates the effort behind the work. Instead, they fixate on the smallest imperfections, often magnifying them to the point where they overshadow any positive aspects. This type of criticism is particularly paralyzing because it fosters a mindset where only perfection is acceptable, leaving no room for mistakes, experimentation, or learning. When dealing with a perfectionist, we may find ourselves constantly striving for an unattainable ideal, feeling as though we will never be good enough. This can manifest in different areas of life, whether it's a project at work, a personal endeavor, or even aspects of our appearance or character. The perfectionist's sharp eye for flaws doesn't motivate us to improve, rather it makes us afraid to try in the first place. It creates an environment where creativity is stifled, and the desire for growth is replaced by fear of failure. This fear becomes a significant barrier to progress as we begin to doubt our abilities and become reluctant to take risks or push beyond our comfort zones. A more subtle yet equally toxic version of the eternal critic is the person who always assumes the worst. Known as the negative Nelly, this critic constantly points out potential pitfalls, dangers, and obstacles that could arise often before we've even had a chance to get started. While some caution is valuable, the negative Nelly's approach is fundamentally about discouragement. They focus on what could go wrong rather than on the possibilities for success. For instance, if we express excitement about a new opportunity or project, the negative Nelly might quickly respond with, "That's a risky move," or "Have you thought about all the ways this could fail?" These kinds of comments are draining because they leave no room for optimism, ambition, or enthusiasm. Over time, the negative Nelly can make us feel as though every idea we have is doomed to fail before it even begins. This type of criticism is not rooted in a genuine desire to protect us, but in the instinct to crush our confidence by planting seeds of doubt and fear. The result is that we may begin to avoid pursuing new ideas or passions, believing that failure is inevitable. There is also a form of criticism that is less overt, but equally harmful, what might be called the indirect critic. This type of person will not openly criticize you to your face, but will do so behind your back or in subtle, passive-aggressive ways. They may make snide remarks or offer backhanded compliments that on the surface seem harmless but carry an underlying message of disapproval. For example, someone might say, "Well, you're doing great," for someone who doesn't have much experience, or "I didn't think you'd be able to pull this off, but you did okay." These comments, while seemingly innocuous, are intended to undermine our confidence and reinforce feelings of inadequacy. The indirect critic avoids confrontation by disguising their criticism in more socially acceptable forms, but the impact is still the same. It causes us to question our abilities, feel insecure, and ultimately hold ourselves back. The difficulty with indirect criticism is that it's often harder to pinpoint, making it more insidious. It leaves us with lingering doubt, unsure of whether the comments were truly critical or if we are overreacting. The result is that we internalize these remarks, allowing them to shape our perception of ourselves in ways that diminish our growth. In many cases, eternal critics are found within the circles we frequent: family, friends, or colleagues. These are people who may claim to be acting out of care or concern, but in reality are stifling our growth with their constant negative feedback. They often say things like, "I'm just trying to help you," or "I only want what's best for you," but their words feel more like barriers than support. Instead of being a source of encouragement or constructive feedback, their criticism feeds into our fears, doubts, and insecurities. This type of criticism can be particularly challenging because it comes from those who are close to us. We may feel torn between honoring our relationships and protecting our emotional well-being. When someone close to us continually undermines our efforts, it's essential to set boundaries and communicate the impact of their words. Without this recognition, the eternal critic may continue to dominate our inner narrative, leading us to question our abilities, value, and direction. The cost of enduring the influence of eternal critics is high. Constant exposure to negative feedback, particularly when it lacks constructive elements, gradually chips away at our self-esteem and confidence. Over time, we may become so accustomed to this criticism that we stop pursuing our dreams, choosing instead to stay within the confines of what feels safe and approved by others. Our personal growth is stunted, and our potential is left untapped. In many cases, these critics make us believe that we are incapable of success or that our efforts are not worth pursuing. This mindset limits us, trapping us in cycles of self-doubt, anxiety, and stagnation. The weight of their criticism keeps us from moving forward, trying new things, and truly reaching for what we deserve in life. Dishonesty and manipulation are among the most corrosive forces in human interactions. They subtly undermine trust, create confusion, and ultimately destroy the foundations upon which healthy relationships are built. Whether in personal or professional settings, encountering dishonest and manipulative individuals can be profoundly damaging, often leaving the victims questioning their perceptions and doubting their own judgment. These individuals often possess a disturbing ability to present themselves as trustworthy while operating with ulterior motives, using deception and emotional manipulation to achieve their goals. Over time, this behavior creates an atmosphere of fear, uncertainty, and self-doubt, making it increasingly difficult to discern truth from falsehood. At their core, dishonest and manipulative individuals are motivated by self-interest, seeking to control or influence others to serve their personal agenda. This behavior is not limited to overt lies or direct manipulation. It often includes more subtle tactics such as gaslighting, triangulation, guilt-tripping, and using others' emotions against them. These techniques, while often imperceptible at first, can create a slow erosion of self-confidence, mental clarity, and emotional stability. The danger lies in the fact that these tactics are not always immediately obvious, and by the time their effects become evident, the damage has already been done. Dishonest individuals often begin by creating a facade of trustworthiness. They present themselves as dependable, sincere, and empathetic, offering advice and support that seems genuine. At first, their actions appear harmless or even beneficial, and we may feel a sense of relief in having someone to rely on. However, as time passes, their actions begin to reveal subtle contradictions, small lies, or omissions that don't quite add up. These discrepancies often go unnoticed at first, but over time they accumulate, and we begin to question the consistency of the person's behavior. Manipulators are particularly skilled at creating a false sense of intimacy, using charm and charisma to disarm others. They know how to tell people what they want to hear, playing on their emotions and desires to create a sense of emotional connection. In doing so, they lower the defenses of their targets, making them more susceptible to manipulation. For example, a manipulative person may present themselves as a savior or someone who truly understands your struggles, offering advice or assistance that feels deeply personal. But as the relationship progresses, it becomes clear that their primary goal is not to support you, but to gain control, exploit vulnerabilities, or achieve a hidden objective. One of the most insidious tactics employed by dishonest and manipulative individuals is gaslighting. Gaslighting involves intentionally distorting or undermining another person's perception of reality, causing them to question their memories, thoughts, or beliefs. This psychological manipulation is often subtle and incremental, making it difficult for the victim to recognize at first. A manipulator may deny past events, claim that the victim is overreacting, or suggest that their feelings are irrational or unfounded. Over time, this consistent distortion of reality can lead to confusion, self-doubt, and a deep sense of insecurity. For instance, a manipulative partner might repeatedly dismiss their spouse's concerns by saying things like, "You're just being paranoid," or "That never happened, you're imagining things." In such situations, the victim begins to doubt their own perceptions and feel isolated from their own reality. Gaslighting can have long-term effects, including anxiety, depression, and a loss of self-esteem, as the victim is made to feel powerless and unsure of their ability to trust their own judgment. The manipulator's ultimate goal is to create confusion and dependency, leaving the victim feeling disoriented and vulnerable to further exploitation. Another common tactic used by manipulators is triangulation, which involves bringing a third party into a situation in order to create conflict, division, or confusion. This tactic is often used to exert control over others by pitting people against each other or creating a sense of competition or rivalry. The manipulator will often speak negatively about one individual to another, painting them in a bad light, and then observe the fallout, furthering their own agenda in the process. For example, a manipulative colleague might intentionally spread rumors about a coworker to create tension between them and other colleagues. They might tell one person, "Did you hear about what Jane did? I'm really disappointed in her," while simultaneously telling Jane, "I don't know why they're upset with you. I really tried to defend you." The result is that the victim feels alienated, confused, and unsure of whom to trust, while the manipulator stands back and enjoys the chaos they have caused. Triangulation not only serves the manipulator's goal of controlling the situation, but it also reinforces the idea that the target is isolated and vulnerable, making them more susceptible to future manipulation. Manipulators are also adept at using guilt tripping as a tool of emotional control. Guilt is a powerful emotion that can lead people to act against their own best interests out of a sense of obligation or responsibility. A manipulator will exploit this by subtly making the victim feel guilty for asserting their own needs or desires. They may use phrases such as, "I can't believe you'd do this to me after everything I've done for you," or, "If you really cared about me, you would understand why I'm doing this." This emotional blackmail preys on the victim's sense of compassion, empathy, and desire to avoid conflict. The manipulator positions themselves as the long-suffering, self-sacrificing person who deserves special treatment or understanding, creating a scenario where the victim feels responsible for the manipulator's emotional state. Over time, the victim may begin to feel as though they are constantly walking on eggshells, trying to please the manipulator in order to avoid guilt, shame, or emotional punishment. Dishonest and manipulative individuals are also known for playing the victim in order to avoid taking responsibility for their actions. When confronted with their behavior, they often turn the tables, making the accuser feel as though they are the ones at fault. This tactic is particularly effective in evading accountability and deflecting blame. The manipulator may claim that they are being unfairly treated, misunderstood, or persecuted, all while denying or minimizing the harm they have caused. For example, a manipulative individual who has hurt someone may respond by saying, "Why are you attacking me when I've been nothing but good to you?" or "You're overreacting. I didn't mean to hurt you." This creates a scenario where the manipulator avoids facing their wrongdoing and shifts the focus onto the victim, leaving them feeling guilty for pointing out the manipulation in the first place. The end result is a situation where the manipulator escapes consequence while the victim becomes trapped in a cycle of self-doubt and emotional exhaustion. The impact of interacting with dishonest and manipulative individuals can be profound and long-lasting. Over time, the victim's sense of self-worth, confidence, and trust in others can be eroded. The constant exposure to dishonesty and manipulation creates a toxic environment where healthy communication, vulnerability, and emotional security are undermined. Victims may begin to feel trapped, as though they are constantly navigating a maze of lies, emotional traps, and hidden agendas. This leaves them unable to trust their own perceptions, making it increasingly difficult to make decisions or assert themselves in relationships. Ultimately, dishonest and manipulative individuals not only harm their immediate targets, but they also have the potential to create a ripple effect that impacts wider social networks, communities, and workplaces. The subtlety of their tactics makes it difficult for others to recognize the manipulation, and those affected may find themselves isolated and unable to seek support. The consequences of this behavior can take years to recover from, and in many cases, the damage done is irreversible. Change is an inevitable part of life. It is an inherent aspect of growth, development, and progress, both for individuals and societies. Yet, there are some who resist change not because they lack the capacity for it, but because they are unwilling to embrace it. This unwillingness to change can be rooted in various factors, from fear of the unknown to a deep-seated belief that the status quo is preferable to any form of transformation. The unwilling to change, whether in personal, professional, or societal contexts, often remain entrenched in outdated behaviors, mindsets, or systems, stifling their own growth and, in some cases, that of others around them. When we encounter individuals who are unwilling to change, it can be frustrating, whether it's a friend who clings to destructive habits, a colleague who refuses to adapt to new technologies, or a society that resists progressive ideas. The effects of this resistance can be widespread. It is essential to understand that this unwillingness to change isn't simply an act of defiance or stubbornness. There are often deeply ingrained psychological, emotional, and cultural factors at play that make the act of changing seem daunting, uncomfortable, or even impossible. One of the primary reasons people resist change is the fear of the unknown. Human beings are creatures of habit, and our routines provide us with a sense of stability and security. The idea of venturing into the unknown, whether it's a new job, a new relationship, or even adopting a new way of thinking, can evoke anxiety. This fear is often tied to a lack of control. When faced with the prospect of change, individuals may feel as though they are relinquishing control over their environment, their future, or even their identity. The unknown is inherently uncertain, and for some, that uncertainty is far scarier than remaining in a situation that may no longer serve them. For example, an individual who has been in the same job for years may resist new career opportunities, even if they are dissatisfied with their current role. The comfort of the familiar, despite its drawbacks, can outweigh the anxiety of the unknown that comes with trying something new. The fear of failure, rejection, or the potential for disappointment can create a paralysis that prevents change from taking place. This fear keeps them rooted in their current situation, unable or unwilling to take the necessary steps toward improvement or self-actualization. At its core, the unwillingness to change often stems from a deep attachment to the familiar. People develop patterns of thinking and behaving over time, which can become ingrained in their psyche. These habits, even if they are not productive or healthy, provide a sense of stability. When individuals are asked to step outside of their comfort zones, the resistance is not always about rejecting progress, but about rejecting the discomfort that accompanies growth. Take, for instance, someone who has lived in the same town for most of their life. The idea of moving to a new city for a better job opportunity might seem enticing in terms of its benefits, but the thought of leaving behind familiar surroundings, relationships, and routines is unsettling. The uncertainty of navigating new social circles, adapting to new environments, and living in an unfamiliar place outweighs the potential rewards. In this case, the comfort of familiarity holds them back, keeping them tethered to a life that, while predictable, does not necessarily fulfill their potential. Another psychological factor that plays a significant role in the unwillingness to change is cognitive dissonance, the mental discomfort that arises when there is a conflict between one's beliefs and behaviors. When individuals are confronted with new information or a change that challenges their established beliefs, they may experience discomfort. To resolve this dissonance, people often choose to ignore, deny, or rationalize the new information rather than change their behaviors or beliefs. For example, an individual who believes that their way of doing things is the right way may resist adopting new strategies or perspectives, even if they are more effective. This could be seen in someone who is set in their ways at work, refusing to learn new skills or adapt to technological advancements. Despite evidence that suggests the new approach would lead to better results, they may stick to old methods, rationalizing that their way has worked in the past and therefore should continue to work in the future. This cognitive dissonance creates a barrier to change, as the individual is unwilling to reconcile their outdated beliefs with new realities. Often, the unwillingness to change is linked to a lack of self-awareness. Some individuals are so entrenched in their own viewpoints, behaviors, and ways of life that they fail to see the need for change. They may be unaware of how their actions impact others, or they may not recognize the negative consequences of their behaviors. This lack of awareness can prevent them from seeing the value of adapting to new circumstances. An individual who refuses to change may have difficulty acknowledging their own limitations. They may dismiss feedback, resist introspection, or even react defensively to constructive criticism. And this lack of self-awareness can manifest in a variety of ways, from a person who constantly blames external factors for their failures to one who refuses to acknowledge that their outdated habits are contributing to their lack of progress. Without the ability to self-reflect, change becomes an abstract concept, something that happens to others but not to them. In addition to internal psychological factors, the unwillingness to change can also be influenced by external factors such as cultural norms and social pressures. Societies often hold certain values, traditions, and beliefs that are passed down from generation to generation. These social constructs can become so ingrained in individuals' identities that questioning or challenging them feels like an act of betrayal or disloyalty. For example, in some cultures, traditional gender roles or family expectations may be so firmly entrenched that individuals are reluctant to explore alternative paths. A person may feel bound by these cultural norms, believing that to break away from them would be to reject their heritage or family. In such cases, the unwillingness to change is not just a matter of personal preference, but a manifestation of the pressure to conform to societal expectations.